So let's get straight into the questions we have prepared. What can be expected from Vue X versus Pina? Since it looks that Vue X is still maintained actively, is there any plans for further development, or should we switch to Pina?
So if you're starting a new project, I would strongly suggest just start with Pinia. In most cases, it covers the same use case, but it's simpler. Pinia also has DevTools support, thanks to how the new DevTools has a plugin architecture that any library can plug into. So we don't have to hard code state management support into the DevTools itself, which is actually great. So yeah, in the context of pure Vue 3 applications, there's very little reason to go with Vue X over Pinia at this stage. And so as we've already said, Pinia is de facto Vue X 5. That is, it incorporates a lot of the ideas that we originally intended to have in Vue X 5. But then we were debating because, if we change things too much, is it still Vue X, or should we just call it something else?
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, so Pinia was the reason it started as a separate project is because we want to allow Eduardo to experiment and explore without the burden of, I have to make this exactly the same like Vue X, right? And I think the result is great, right? So from all the users that have picked up Pinia, we have heard extremely positive feedback. So we are happy to recommend it as the new default.
Cool, thanks. So I question a bit more on the state of Vue.js. Lots of libraries out there don't work with Vue.js 3, Vue 3. Sometimes we had to shift to different versions. Do you have any plans to sort of influence the libraries to make them ready for Vue.js 3?
Yeah, so I think the moving to Vue 3 as the new default will be the biggest sort of motivation for library authors to upgrade, to offer upgraded versions, because I think one of the reasons a lot of libraries, they didn't work on Vue 3 version was simply because we didn't switch over to Vue 3 as the default. So they're like, so Vue 2 is still there. It's still the default. Why should I support Vue 3, right? But now with the new version, the new default switch, everything. So basically, previously they're like, okay, my library still works with the default version of Vue, so I don't need to do anything. But after that, it's a different story.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Maybe a big question. I don't know if you have enough time to answer. I can imagine this is something you get asked quite a lot. But what are the top 2-3 areas of Vue you'd like to improve in the next year or so?
So there are 2 areas. So the first one is regarding in a full stack context with server rendered and hydration, we want to give people more flexibility of splitting up the hydration process. So there are interesting things that people are playing around in the meta framework layer, like partial hydration, island architecture, and all that. But we also have some ideas on how you can provide built-in primitives. For example, when you define an async component, you can also configure how it should hydrate on the client, so that all the async code split points naturally become hydration split points as well. And then another aspect of it is we also want to explore how we can further improve the performance. And also, as a framework, we want to make sure that Vue can offer the optimal solution for different cases, right? So one of the things that people have been thinking about is Vue 3, and starting with Vue 2 and into Vue 3, Vue has moved more and more assuming a single page application context as a default, right? Although Vue 3 can still be used via a script tag, it's no longer the optimal way to do so, because you're shipping a pretty heavy in-browser compiler and doing everything on the fly, so you won't get the optimal performance. So, which is why I worked on Petite Vue, right? Petite Vue is essentially it's the same Vue experience, but it's specific design for enhancing server render static HTML. It just does a better job at that. But again, then we also have a possibility to explore alternative template compilation strategies. For example, there are a lot of interesting ideas in newer frameworks like Svelte and Solid that we can potentially learn some things from them and then improve the performance of Vue as well.
Cool, thanks. One question, I'll just segue into it because there was or I'll use it to segue into another question, but I think you already covered. One second. There we go. I think you already covered it with covering the new docs. I'm not sure if I fully understand the question in terms of comprehensive tutorial, but I guess you're covering a lot of content in the docs, and it's not always the run through from the start to finish. So are there any plans on adding this? And I think we saw a preview of this in terms of the tutorial that you showed us in the new docs, where you said you could cover a lot of the basics steps by step.
Yeah. So the tutorial currently on the docs is meant for beginners to get into Vue, to learn the basics, right? So I assume by comprehensive tutorial, you mean something that builds an actual app from start to finish. So this is something that is not currently on the roadmap because there are a lot of great content already out there. Like we have a lot of writers and video producers that make this kind of tutorials. So we are actually also actively working with companies like Vue Mastery, Vue School, obviously. So we will have a lot of interesting video courses. I mean, we already have a lot of these video courses out there, so you can check them out. Making this kind of full tutorial takes a lot of time, right? It's very time consuming. So we kind of want to, from the team's perspective, we kind of want to focus on the framework itself. And then, teaching people to build actual apps is kind of we leave it to the experts who do that as their job, right? So
yeah, sounds good. And since you mentioned that VuePress is powering the new docs, do you have any comments on the live part session? How was that made?
So that part is actually using a library called @vue/REPL. So @vue/REPL. It's on GitHub. So go to Vue.js/REPL. You can actually use it in your own Vue 3 project if you want. Just note that it pulls in some pretty heavy dependencies, but it's still much lighter than, say, a full VS Code running in the browser. It uses Code Mirror, and then it uses Acorn to parse and transform. So obviously, it needs to pull in the actual entire Vue single file component compiler as well. And then it compiles your single file components into plain JavaScript modules. Then it transpiles the JavaScript module into a custom format that can be concatenated together, then evaluated in an iframe to simulate the bundling process. So yeah, it's a bit of a black magic in there, but it's a pretty neat little thing that you can use in your own project as well.
Cool. Since we talked about VuePress, we still have VuePress. Any comments on like the future of VuePress versus VuePress?
Yeah, so VuePress is intended to replace VuePress. We've already talked with the current maintainers of VuePress, and the team has essentially acknowledged that. So we had a team member that worked on VuePress 2. That was before VuePress is kind of got more mature. But at this stage, we realized, okay, so first of all, Vue is the future. Second, we don't really want to have two completely different systems that does pretty much the same thing. So a lot of the things are actually reused directly in VuePress, right? So it started out as a spiritual successor. We also have team discussions regarding whether we should just replace VuePress or rename VuePress to just VuePress 3 or something like that. It's possible, but we're still discussing that. Yeah.
Cool. I think I've heard you cover this before, so I'm sure the answer is not so long. But why TypeScript and what benefits do it bring? Is it better for TypeScript support in general, or is it also because it makes your job easier?
It's both, right? So first of all, for a project of Vue scale, a type system is definitely necessary. It's almost a must if you want to maintain it over the long run, avoid simple mistakes, make it safer to refactor, also improve the overall development experience, definitely. So Vue 2 originally used Flow because we thought that we could progressively introduce it into the code base, but turns out that it was not that easy to get 100% coverage with Flow. If you have parts of your code base that's just not written with type in mind. And also, Flow's public support IDE tooling just lagged behind. And over time, TypeScript just got better and better. So in Vue 3, we decided to just switch over to TypeScript, which also solved the TypeScript type definition generation problem.
Cool. A different question. We haven't really covered these type of things, more technical. But do you think the core teams should overgrow in number of members, or are there enough members to continue developing quickly and adaptively?
Yeah. So there is really no fixed goal of how many members do we need, or because Vue team has always been a very organic growth. Team members join and come and go based on their own interest in contributing to the community. And in a lot of ways, of course, I try to coordinate the efforts, encourage people to work together. But in a lot of ways, even if you join the team, we won't say like, okay, this is your job now. It's not really a job. It's people join the team because they love Vue. They want to contribute, not because they want to get paid or doing something. And on the other hand, it's interesting because Vue is not a company, right? In many ways, when we think about a startup, you always have deadlines to hit. You have to think about your investors, how to make money, your business model, and all that. The nice thing about Vue is that we are not in it to make money. We're not in it to conquer the world or something. Our goal is to just keep improving Vue to make it serve our developers better. But we don't have to do it at the expense of, say, overworking ourselves, or we try to turn it into a business, trying to hire people to work on it. If we have to do that, then it's sort of a different, it's just a different thing. Vue is a community-driven open source project. So if there are a lot of people, there are more team members who want to come and contribute, that's great. But we won't be like, okay, we don't have enough people, we need to do something about it. And then there's also the aspect of it where in open source collaboration, right? Because it's not like a company that because I'm someone's boss, I can tell them to do whatever I want, right? Open source is about collaboration. It's about recognizing someone who has the willingness to contribute and then encourage them to do so. And because of that, it's oftentimes it doesn't mean the more people you have, the more work you can get done. Sometimes the more people you have, the more communication overhead you get. And it becomes harder to coordinate the interest and efforts from different people. So it's not always like the more the better. It's also an interesting challenge to sort of how to coordinate the efforts from different people with different incentives.
That makes sense. Yeah. The next question is what happened to Vue 2.7 and the backporting of Vue 3 features to the 2X branch? Will Vue 3 get a compiler-based option like Svelte? The Svelte DX is so good. That was a comment, not a question.
So first, 2.7 is still on the roadmap. Obviously, it's pushed back but we will still work on it. And then we'll get Vue3 get a compiler-based option like so. So by compiler-based option, I'm not sure if you mean if you're focusing on the DX side or the code generation and performance side. So first of all, I don't know if you've been following the latest RFCs. We do have a so first of all, script setup is in some ways very Svelte-like already, right? So if you haven't been using script setup, you should use it. And then there's also an upcoming experimental feature called reactivity transform, which I could probably. So it is actually documented on the staging website. So if you search reactivity transform on the staging new documentation, you'll see that it gives you something really, really close to the Svelte DX. And the cool thing is it also allows you to use it outside of single file components. So you get the same experience in and out of components instead of having to use different APIs. Like when you're in component and out of component, you have to use. So that's the case for Svelte, right? Inside the Svelte component, you can use the magic syntax, but outside of it, you have to use a different API called stores. And then I don't want to spoil it too much, but if you're talking about the compiler-based optimizations, I mean, Vue already does a lot of compiler optimizations, but we can always do more. So so I can tell you that yes, Vue can do more, compiler-based optimizations than we do right now, even though we already managed to get Virtual DOM to be almost as performance as Svelte. There is something we can do to make it even better. So, but that's later for later of this year.
Sounds exciting. It's a pity because we had so many more questions, but we knew that we couldn't cover them all in the session we have planned. But you are active in open source, even though not everyone will get a question from you in the open source threads. I know that they can get and follow you on Twitter and keep getting more questions answered through other means, I'm sure, throughout the year. So thanks again, Evan. It was great to have you talk. And
Thank you.
I wish you good luck with all the future endeavors or this year's endeavors with Vue and Vue3.